As chairman has resigned. See, so.
Car name designs is live tonight. The red carpet again. Right.
This is the comment.
Welcome to the meeting. Then we're on air now, as it were. No welcome. I just said to Will, there's no welcome on the agenda, but tend to welcome people here anyway. I think it's okay, isn't it? Really. So listen, well, it's great news for LDC to see me back in this role, and I congratulate all those who voted for me. That's the first thing. I've already welcomed the new members of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee and given them some homework, I'm afraid, with the toolkits and so on. And the new members are Anne Hughes, Tom Marshall, and Russ Bragger. But we'll do so again in person, at least to Anne and Russ. Apologies from Tom and Brian Yates. So the apologies are from Brian Yates and Tom Marshall. I've also got apologies from the leader, who wasn't expecting anyway, wasn't invited really, and the cabinet member for housing and planning, Alex Farrell, who I was expecting. So any political questions I've got here will have to be passed on via officers. So if you've got political questions, it's not fair for officers to answer those, but at least I'll pass them on and we'll get a response back. But there you are. That's that one.
Steve. I think Councillor Ray sent his apologies.
Oh,
this afternoon.
I can't believe I missed that because I've got it written down here. Sorry, yes. Yes, sorry, yes. Paul Ray certainly did. Very late, family issue. So, yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, sorry. Right. So, minutes of the previous meeting. First of all, on the agenda. Next on the agenda, rather. Any questions apart from two? Did I? Oh, yeah. Oh. Yeah, that's why I need Will, because I just get carried away. Are there any declarations of interest? Okay, but it doesn't mean that he shouldn't have asked me to ask, because we must ask this question. So thank you, Will. Minutes of the last meeting, say.
Yeah, it's a matter of accuracy, Chair. On page 4, it refers to the report that we had on Clay Streets. My recollection and my understanding from that report was that it would be quiet little side roads or cul-de-sacs that would be used for play streets. But one of the members in Burntwood recently found out via a resident who'd been consulted that a play street was being proposed on his road, which is not a cul-de-sac and not a quiet little side. Just want some clarification about the types of streets that are being used for play streets, and to make a plea that local members are consulted beforehand, before they go out to residents to consult with residents and get objections. It might be a good idea to use the intelligence that local members have about whether that's a suitable street or not.
Thanks. I don't suppose anybody here has the answer to that, but if not, I'll certainly get the answer back and share with members. Get the response and share back.
People have the same recollection, but
well, at the pre-meeting, 1 or 2 seem to have had that, and I'll certainly go to the YouTube and watch it and just see.
It was certainly something that I felt as well, that it was just going to be quiet side streets, nothing main. Because a big problem you've got on a main street is that other people, not just the people who live in the street, but people who go through that road to get to work, to go to the shops, to whatever else. So with some clarity would be worthwhile, to be honest.
I might have made a joke about Watling Street at the time, which is that's not in the minutes as well. But yeah, so yeah, for Paisley, thank you. Anything else on the minutes? Please, Colin.
Chair, item 56. I did mention about members speaking fully and taking full part in committee, and I've asked you to follow that up, please. I hope that members will take more of a part than they have in the past. And secondly, under the item 57 at the bottom, every meeting of the LWMTS board was minuted, and our chief executive agreed to share those minutes with members. I understand they will be coming, but we've not had them yet.
Yeah, just checking out on the issue. Hopefully by the end of the week we'll know. We're doing that, so thank you. I appreciate them being sent to me early on. I'll go with the legal side of things. Yes, thank you, Colin. Thank you. But well, do we agree those minutes? We do or not really?
Good to me.
So thank you. They're not agreed at full council, just to let people know that it's not full council's job to of the minutes. That is our role. On health matters, there's nothing there you've got, because there's not been a meeting since the last meeting that I had and reported on at the county council, the healthcare overview and scrutiny committee. There is induction next Monday there. Health overview and scrutiny committee, but I will be attending that. And I hope that the MP for Clacton doesn't turn up and delay proceedings, as he apparently did when there was overview and scrutiny training at the county council earlier this month. The next meetings, the next proper meeting is the 30th of June, and the one after that is the 21st of July. And as it happens, our next ONS meeting here is the 22nd of July. So he may be lucky and get 2 reports from me, if I can do one quick enough from the day before, at that meeting. There's 4 others to the end of the year. So we're reporting on that.
Yeah. Will we find out who the county rep for LDC?
Sorry, do we?
Will we find out who the county rep for the representative of the county for?
I hope so. Yes. I mean, yeah. I'll be following that up, because I wondered about that because of the task group that you're chairing and that. So yeah.
I think
Well, may know.
the scrutiny officer at the county council has emailed me to say that he'll be letting us know in due course. That information hasn't reached us just yet, but it is on the way.
Thank you, Sue.
Yeah, just to say, can I thank Leona for keeping us updated on both the issues around the birthing unit at Samuel Johnson and the Burntwood Health Centre. But just to point out again, these changed timetables keep being delayed more and more, and there's still no planning application for the new health centre having been submitted. It was supposed to be submitted by the end of April. It still hasn't been submitted. And if Leona and yourself, Chair, can keep up the pressure on that, at the very least we need to know is what the planning application is going to look like. It's obviously not going to be completed by the end of 2025 now, and it will take some time to go through the planning process. So it's not likely to even start until next year. So delay upon delay upon delay. And this lies with the Integrated Care Board and the County Council jointly, who are pursuing this project. So any pressure that can be put on those 2 bodies would be helpful.
Respond to that really quickly.
Yes, please, Leon.
And obviously we've been putting a lot of pressure on their side. So I'm hoping we'll get a date soon with the ICB. I'm fingers crossed on that. We're just waiting for them to confirm on that. So fingers crossed.
So change of staff there, hasn't it?
Yeah, it has. And we've just been digging around everywhere in right and relevant persons to speak to. Hopefully I'll keep the task group updated on when the meeting is.
Great, thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks. Okay, so I'll go on to the 2 main items on the agenda, the big ones really, certainly important ones. Agenda item 5, which is the housing, homelessness and rough sleeping strategy. And I'll say a few things, but Liz presumably is coming to present it, or Liz and Sam, sorry. Yeah, Liz and Sam. Recommendations of the committee's comment on the draft housing, homelessness and rough sleeping strategy, and suggest any changes before the final draft is considered for approval by Cabinet. And we're saying at the pre-meeting about on the work programme where the empty homes policy is now included in this. You can actually spot it, so you can draw attention to that later on. If you could just do a brief thing on the report. I'm going to go through the report, then the draft strategy, and I've asked members if they have any references in the evidence base that relates to the strategy itself to mention that. But if you want to have an introduction on that, be fine, if that's okay. Thank you.
Chairman, yeah, so I'm delighted to be here to.
Oh, and I did bring you biscuits from yesterday.
Just a name check. No, I'm really delighted to be here to present the housing and homelessness strategy, and I've got Simon and Gemma here with me today, who've worked also really hard on the strategy. The strategy reflects the views of hundreds of people across the district, both members sat around this table who took part in a series of really informative and supportive workshops, which gave us fantastic insight into the things that we need to be included in that strategy. We carried out a wide range of consultation with people that have been through the housing and homelessness process recently, those that are still looking for a home on our register and those that are still being supported through the homelessness process. And we've taken all of those views, including workshops with our own teams, not just within the housing team. So we've been really ambitious here, and we've been working across all teams in the council to look at the role that every team needs to play to drive forward a really comprehensive and ambitious strategy. And the strategy before you represents the outcome of all of that. And I really wanted to put on record a big thank you to everybody who's played a part in that, because it's certainly not just mine, Gemma's or Simon's strategy. This is a whole organisation-wide strategy that really does aim to build on Lichfield District 2050 and drive forward those elements. We're legally required to have a housing and homelessness strategy, so that's why we've got this, and why it's separate from the LD 2050 strategy. But also we know how passionate our member cohort and how passionate our officers are, and how important housing is to people living in the district, and the right of everybody to have a safe and suitable home that they can call theirs. So we really hope that this strategy meets the committee's expectations in terms of its ambitions, in terms of its innovation, and in terms of its drive to make a change locally over the coming years. There are 3 strategic aims in the strategy. So we've got the ambition to prevent homelessness and eradicate rough sleeping, and we've been making great progress on that recently, thanks to the work we've already started in temporary accommodation. To ensure that people have access to better quality local homes, and you will have fed into and commented on the design code, which is already starting to make a difference locally, as well as to deliver more affordable homes. We've put together, because we really want people to feel passionate about this strategy out in the community, we've put together a simple 1-page overview, which should be in your pack, and that we hope it will make it easy for people to understand what we're trying to deliver through strategies, because strategies can be hard to read. I get that, they can be long and wordy, and we're hoping that that might help to engage people and really kind of drive home what we're trying to deliver. And that includes our high-level ambitions, including eradicating rough sleeping, maximising affordable homes, delivering a council homes programme, as well as holding those problem landlords to account to drive up standards. Really looking forward to hearing your views and whether or not this represents and reflects back to you what you said to us in those workshops. I want to thank Councillor Ball for highlighting that we've completely misnamed and I've had to write this down, the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities wrongly, because it's now called the Department for Housing, Communities and Local Government. Thank you, Councillor Ball. And then just to pick up on your point, Chairman, we are not taking the empty homes policy guidance through as part of this. It will go through as a separate activity when we've identified the resources to drive that forward. So it won't go to Cabinet, it will be an addendum later. So that will come forward later.
Okay. I'll go through them to the. I'd like to go through page by page on this report to start with. The front page, this page. Can I just mention though, there's page 53, which has the achievements that have been achieved so far, and I would like people to not be aware of that. So that's on page 53. Since the adoption of the last housing, homelessness and rough sleeping strategy in 2019, we have, and there's a whole list of achievements there. And I wanted to be fair and draw attention to that. So the recommendations, there's a background on page 10, but the first one I've got is actually, I just want to draw attention to 3.3 and then the bullet points on 3.5, which is the challenges we've got there. So then on page 11, I've got Colin down. Russ. 11? Yeah.
Page
9.
Page 9. You didn't mention page 9 before, did you?
I did.
I can't let Ross in there. Page 9.
No.
Oh yeah, you sort of did, yeah. No, please.
Let Ross go ahead.
You can't overrule the chair. Russ, please, page 9.
It first comes on page 9, the 3 bullet points, and then they keep being referred to lower down. The second one, more affordable homes. What I suppose in my mind, I'm questioning why it doesn't say more affordable homes and more social homes. In some of the detail lower on, it talks about social housing. And I would have thought that was something that should be up there as part of the strategy, rather than like a detail like under affordable homes, if you know what I mean, because they are different, and particularly you can argue about how affordable homes are, but it is a different thing.
I think that's a really good point. That way.
The intent was very much to include social homes as well.
Yeah, I've seen the detail, but it's just not there in those points.
Colin, please.
Yeah, on top of page 11, in February, March 2025, council workshops took place, which Liz has referred to.
Yeah.
I can't remember how many councillors came to those sessions. Do you have that information to hand?
I think it's roughly about 22.
Yeah.
22.
It's less than half of the numbers of councillors.
We also had lots of councillors feed in as well, separate to that. So some of them couldn't attend, but we did have comments sent through to us.
I just think it's disappointing that the majority of the councillors don't seem to be interested in this really important topic, and the cabinet member isn't interested enough to come along himself. I spoke to him on Wednesday, and we arranged to meet tonight to check out a diary as a shadow cabinet member we could meet, and he's not here, which is a disappointment. Anyway, I'll let
His apologies and
stick to the wall. And in April 2025, Summer was met with Bomford to partner strategic workshop, and I'm just wondering what progress is being made with that, because I've certainly not heard anything yet. Maybe no progress is made, or maybe I just don't know. But it really is important that we hold their feet to the fire and make sure that they're properly accountable for the dreadful service in the main that they're giving to our tenants in the district.
Allow me to respond on this. So there's been a lot of work going on to hold them to account with regards to the repairs issues that were raised. So that's progressing very well. We are waiting for them for another date to then follow up, and that's something that I'm chasing for on a regular basis. So I will continue to do that, and that should be coming out soon.
Thank you.
We have, yes, in terms of the repairs work, sorry, as Simon highlights, we have been out inspecting properties and really holding them to account to make sure that repairs are delivered. And that's been led by James's team and Jade.
Sorry.
Yeah, just one more point, if I may. I think, Councillor Bourne, the intent of this strategy is to say that there are other ways of holding them to account, as you and I have discussed as well, in terms of the role of the RPs and things, and our role as a council. This strategy, from our perspective, doesn't put any red lines across that or take any of that off the table. So if we can't continue to make progress with our relationship and the work that we're doing about existing housing, we can certainly do something about the strategy in terms of turning off the tap and opportunities for growth of housing if they do not change and come back to the table and engage more effectively.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Martins, please.
Thanks, Chair. You mentioned paragraph 3.3 of the report.
Yeah.
And it reminded me that so it
It's
mentioned
my fault then.
it's your fault. Thank you. It reminded me there's mention there of the national government homelessness strategy, and we're told at the end that the final version hasn't been released yet. I just wondered if you have any updates on timescales for that, and whether our strategy hopefully can be amended or can incorporate whatever conclusions they reach on their national strategy.
So I don't believe we've got an update on the time frame for that.
No, there's no timeline though, but we were consulted on it back in January, so hopefully it won't be too far off, but we're not sure of any timeline.
And then with regards to updating our strategy, I feel quite strongly this probably will be very much in line. However, I think the key thing will be the delivery plan, to make sure that we can tweak and change the delivery plan. So if there are other opportunities we can take advantage of, or there's other powers or tools we can use to drive forward our ambitions, that we'll take full advantage of that.
I'll certainly ask the MP if he has any clues. Page 12, I forgot to. I know Colin had a question.
Yeah, under legal implications, we're looking at ways to improve Section 106 agreements where builders and developers have to provide some affordable housing as part of the scheme. And I'm interested in that because we certainly haven't been performing as well as we might be, and builders get let off the hook very easily by saying, oh, it's no longer financially viable. So I'd like to get a bit more information about what that kind of work might be, so long as that doesn't break any commercial confidential items.
That's for you to take, because you've been involved in the workshops, haven't you?
I remember what we said now. Thank you. Yeah. So we have had a couple of officer workshops where we've talked about both the process in terms of how we can make sure that 106 agreements are at least at heads of terms level as they go in front of the committee with major developments. Previously, we've had an experience where planning applications have gone through committee approved subject to successful 106 negotiations, and it takes a very long time to get through those negotiations. That doesn't obviously answer your question, Councillor Ball, but there are a number of different elements that we're looking at from the 106 perspective. And what is it called? The cascade?
Yeah, we're looking at a more robust cascade in terms of wording. A lot of our section 106s have just left us in a very weak position in terms of fighting the delivery on site, and we don't want to end up in that situation in future.
Okay, I mean, it clearly has been a weakness, and I'm pleased to hear that looking at ways of closing those loopholes to make sure the developers provide what they're committed to and provide them well.
Okay, okay, John.
Question again on page 12. I'm just considering, it says we will regularly exceed our affordable homes target. And you've got a whole list by 2028, by 2028, lots of things that you say that you will do. How do you propose to actually achieve that? I mean, it's ambitious, but why do you have that level of degree of confidence that you will achieve that by those dates?
Yes, I've attempted to go with that as well. So that's actually the confidence communities part of the Lichfield District 2050 strategy that you're referring to. Like this strategy, we have decided to deliberately be ambitious about this. We recognise that housing, homelessness are critical issues across the whole country and growing issues in our district as well. So I personally believe that if you don't set a really challenging, ambitious target, we're not doing our job, I suppose, which we should be doing as well as we should be doing it. My expectation, I mean, it says that 40% of affordable housing on council-owned sites. Well, council-owned sites, I think, is a key element to that particular line sort of thing. But I'm not sure if I'm answering your question very well, other than to say I don't believe. So our previous housing strategy, homelessness strategy, talked from my perspective about doing more of the same, rather than stepping it right up and saying, well, actually, no, let's be genuinely ambitious. I don't think a previous strategy or iteration has ever talked about delivering 200 homes over the next 5-year period sort of thing. That's the step change in ambition. But if we don't have that ambition and something to target, we'll get more of the same. And that really concerns me, given the importance of this as an issue to everybody that lives in the district.
At least you have a measure, don't you, by which you can gauge.
Exactly that.
I'm wondering how much of it is back end loaded that we've got to wait until 2028 before we actually see some changes.
No, so 2028 is the Lichfield District 2050 strategy. This strategy is a 5-year strategy as well, isn't it? Yeah. But we want to hit the floor running now. So to Councillor Ball's previous question about section 106 and the cascade, there are a number of different mechanisms that will enable us to access or get or receive housing from housing developers to deliver the types of services to the residents and types of quality housing to our residents that we want to as well. I think we've been a little bit shy about doing some of that in the past, and we've done, as I say, the same thing all of the time. This strategy is meant to challenge us to look at other ways to bring forward the housing and to hit that target. Yeah, I'm not sure that is a very good answer. I'm not sure.
Well, there needs to be a management tool, don't there, to actually to say this is where we want to get. I mean, it's also a bit brave as well, and whether it's councils, councillors or officers having said this is the target, we'll make it a bit easier. But then you'll get people say, well, you should have stretch targets, and it's difficult. But I think, well, we're all in this together. We should all be aiming to get that 40%.
Absolutely.
It's a good, fair question, and it was almost well answered, I thought, as well.
Thank you, Chair.
Well, I don't know if I'm jumping over to more pages, but given that Simon has introduced the 200 council homes, I'd like to ask a similar question about, because that is, very welcome, but very drastically different, or, going back for the last 30, 40 years or so. There's not much, the delivery plan has not quite been worked out yet. I just wondered what steps are already in place, and particularly as local government reorganisation means that actually 2050, but even 2030 is slightly uncertain, isn't it? So we need to do things quickly if they're going to happen.
So Chair, again, I hope I don't repeat my previous answer because that is not the intent. But in the past, we've talked about trying to deliver as many affordable houses as we possibly can. We haven't set a target, and from my perspective, I think the lack of target has meant that we've kind of restricted our ambition. We haven't tried different things. If, and please do not hold me to this, although this is a public meeting, it will be recorded, I know, but if the only way to achieve that 200 housing is for us to think about building houses ourselves, then that should absolutely be part of the conversation from my perspective. And again, I think the lack of ambition in the past has meant that we've always shied away from that. But I think this target is meant to say there are no, as I say, there are no red lines. So think about how we can do this differently, how we can be slightly more aggressive with our developers about the percentage of affordable houses and about what happens with those affordable houses. And as I say, if we can't deliver it through that, then there are other councils in the country that are now borrowing money to build housing. They're doing that in a commercial and sustainable way, but it's making a difference to their residents. On LGR, just a final point. I totally agree with the point, and I worry about LGR every day, I promise you as well, because I'm now writing or part writing our submission for November. I think my advice to our officers is that may or may not happen. Regardless of that, our business as usual has to continue. This is such a critical issue. It's business as usual. We have to continue to be ambitious and continue to plan for them.
Could I just, because I thought council houses was building it ourselves, but it could also be, I guess, developers giving them back to us. But
Exactly that.
I think there's also opportunities as well to look for additional funding. So Gemma's doing a piece of work at the moment, working with Homes England to try and bring more funding in. So where we've already invested in temporary accommodation, actually replace some of that funding so we can expand that further. There's opportunities to work with local individuals who have an altruistic aim, and we are talking to people locally that want to deliver both temporary as well as supported accommodation. So there's lots of avenues that we can explore, and I think what this strategy does is it unlocks that opportunity for us as officers to go out and be bold and ambitious with the support of members to really try and drive forward new initiatives that perhaps previously we may not have felt enabled to do.
Right, but I've got Miles waiting now.
Thanks, Chair. It was a follow-up question on LGR, but you may have said all you can really. I just noticed that in the risk register, that's put as a severity of risk is red on LGR. So whether there was any other comment you're going to make on that, or is it just simply look, it's going to have to be business as usual until we know more?
So, Chair, obviously we're submitting a proposal in November. I don't want to go off topic, I know, because this is an important topic as well. But
it's on the work programme as well. So.
Yeah. So we're submitting a proposal. The likelihood is that there will be multiple proposals in our proposal. The key part of the work, from my perspective, in terms of developing that proposal, is the element that is looking at transformation and service design. What do we want a new authority to look like in the future? So I'm leading that for the Southern District councils as well. This type of activity, this type of ambition comes through really, really clearly in our thinking for that. So we may not win the day, as it were, but we will certainly put our best foot forward in terms of what we think is right, and the way that our model of working and the way that we operate as an organisation. I'd like to see that flow through to any new authority, regardless of who it is.
I mean, I think it's going to be very interesting. We do look at this in more detail, because you can't say, well, we'll carry on until there and stop. But we've got to be forward thinking. We've got to be arguing for the district or the people in our district, whether it's part of a unity or whatever. It doesn't matter. We still need to actually be ambitious for our people. So, yeah, that's good to hear. So come back to Colin now. Sorry, you had a question.
Yeah, I mean, just a general comment about the strategy. I think it is ambitious. I think it's very strong. I've got a number of detailed points. If I came across earlier as quite angry about it, that lack of progress, that's because it's taken 7 years, in my view, to get to this point. I've been banging on about this since I was elected in July 2018. And that's not the fault of the officers. That is a political decision by the council not to deal with this, because I asked many times at overview scrutiny committees at full council that we push on and do something more about genuinely affordable housing. And it's only been the last year or so that things are beginning to move. And again, I think it's a real disappointment that the cabinet members here to listen to that. I shall be taking that with them directly after this meeting, trying to contact him. But I think that needs to be fed back to him. That's a disappointment that he's not here. I've got a number of specific points to raise, but I think it's commendable policy, and it's about time that we actually tackled this seriously.
I think it was a family issue, so I'd leave any contact with Alex until tomorrow at least. Sue was next.
Yeah, I just want to follow on, if I can, Colin's point. You know, I think there's a huge amount to commend this strategy. And I have to say, this strategy would not have happened prior to 2023, because as Colin says, he's been banging on about this sort of thing for 7 years. I think I've been banging on about it for quite a bit longer. So I think it's great to see this strategy and the ambition of the strategy. Simon said it's a step change in ambition, and it certainly is. And those stretch targets that you referred to, I think, are really helpful, as is the evidence base and having that information there. Having said that about ambition, I mean, the one point about the list of ambitions there I'd like to follow up on is the ambition to eradicate rough sleeping. I'm not sure that that is ever possible, because some people just simply do not want to be housed in any, you know, because of all sorts of personal problems and issues. And later on in the report, it says that there are an average of 3 street homeless across the district at any one point. Chase Terrace ward must be a lucky ward, because I've got 2 cases at the moment that I would refer to as homeless. They're not. One is sleeping on the streets, one is sleeping in a car. And so when it comes to the almost like the definition of rough sleeping, homeless, street sleeping, are the different segments in what you'd call homeless or rough sleepers. And as I say, I don't think you can ever eradicate it, but perhaps a slight amendment of the wording to move towards an eradication of street sleeping, which is a much uglier way of putting that ambition down. But I think
I'd like to come on to that aspect when I go through the strategy, but we'll get some responses then, if that's okay. Yeah. Hill, John, you on to the...
Yeah, I'm absolutely with Sue that there are a lot of reasons why people won't necessarily be taken off the street, because it's not necessarily just a housing issue. There's people with a lot of mental illness who are on the streets. Just simply building a house is not necessarily going to help them to kind of get off the street and do all the things. I mean, I'm absolutely 100% behind what you're trying to do for all the reasons that you put about mental health, about crime, about a whole lot of other things. And I think those are more important underlying reasons as to why it's important to be ambitious and to actually achieve those goals that we want to do. The housing is like okay, but it's all that other stuff underneath it, I think, for me, that matters, to be honest.
I'm going to go through the strategy. Don't worry. The strategy itself, on page 16 is the forward, which I thought was a good forward, actually. And then contents on page 17. And then page 18, which the last 2 speakers said they were going to raise this issue, is there about preventing homelessness and eradicate rough sleeping. So if you want to respond now, that would be good. Thank you.
Absolutely. So I completely take your point on Councillor Woodward and Hill. What's been really interesting over the last, I'd say, 3 months, so since the temporary accommodation has come into play, is we've managed to secure and sustain tenancies with 2 individuals who were sleeping rough on the streets and who we were told would never ever move into accommodation. You probably are all familiar with the individuals we're talking about. Perhaps we could put eradicate long-term rough sleeping, because you'll never stop somebody sleeping rough for a night. But I truly do believe with the right package of support, which we're now providing not through our partner Spring, but through our own team, that actually, as long as you adopt that housing first principle, which is what we're doing both in our rough sleeping housing pathway scheme units, which we have 6 of those, and we have a number of successful tenants in those who now want to move on to longer term housing, that actually you can eradicate rough sleeping. You can't, as you say, you can't stop someone rocking up one night and saying, I'm going to sleep here tonight. You will also get transient rough sleepers who will come and go. But there are, regardless of the mental health issues, Councillor Hill, that definitely are evident in people who do sleep on the streets, that you can work with them to eradicate their need to sleep rough. And we have seen that. the entrenched rough sleepers we've moved off have been on the streets for over 20 years, and they're now sustaining tenancies. This is an absolutely radical turnaround, and it's come from having those properties we can house them in. So I do believe if we're ambitious in delivering the properties and the right support, there are cases such as people that don't have legal recourse to funds because they're not a British citizen, that is a challenge, and that will always be a challenge. And the other gentleman that you're talking about also has very specific needs, but we are working again with him to try and move him into a pathway that's suitable, and fingers crossed we're nearly there. So I think we should be ambitious, and we should be saying eradicating rough sleeping would be my view. And I think certainly Councillor Farrell is really passionate about that this is the right way to be going forward to deliver this. And I would love to think that we could keep that in.
Yeah, I'll just ask a question, but I'll bring Simon in just on that.
Agreeing with absolutely everything Lizzie has just said, Chair, as well. From my perspective, this language is a call to action for us officers as well. I think over the last several years, we have walked around people who are sleeping in the streets sometimes as well, and thought, well, we're probably doing as much as we possibly can. This is us as a group of officers challenging ourselves, saying we will not accept it. So we will do absolutely everything that we can. Yes, to Councillor Woodward's point, there will be people who slip through the net and things, but it won't be for a want of trying, and that's the difference I think that we haven't seen in previous years.
Just before the question, the one is 20 years rough sleeping, but now he's not, as I understand it. Are you able to say what happened? Were you able to persuade him or her to?
I won't talk specifically about.
No, I just wanted some idea of that. If that was possible.
Speak more generally about.
Yes, please. Yeah.
We tend to work with who find themselves sleeping rough. Generally, there's a large amount of childhood trauma. Generally, there's a large amount of distrust of services. Often those people have gone through services and really kind of gone through the mill.
There you put that in the report.
Not necessarily by design, but they found themselves chewed up and spat out at the end with nobody stopping to look after them and say, well, why have you ended up here? And I think it's about wrapping the services around those people and always saying it doesn't matter what your past is. What we need to focus on is a pathway to a sustainable way of life that isn't living on the streets, and we need to work out what support we need to give you, and that will differ for every single case. No one case is the same, and we have to be patient in that journey, because we will have properties that will get smashed up because that person perhaps has a moment once they've moved in, because moving off the streets into a property will be challenging. We have to be patient that they may well relapse and move back onto the streets for a few weeks, and then we push them back in with encouragement and support. But I honestly think if we can provide that trusted support to these people who find themselves living on the street, and they can start to rely on us, that we will help them towards a more sustainable pathway. That pathway probably won't look like how you and I live in a home. It will probably always be very different, but we have got some very successful outcomes in this housing pathway scheme units, where we're looking to move people on into general needs tenancies. How fantastic is that? So 3 years on, people that used to be living on the streets are now wanting to move into general needs tenancies, and are starting to volunteer in the community, do paid work in the community, and starting to find their way forward to a more sustainable and healthy life. And I think we've got the powers and the passion to do that.
Well, I think you've given the answer, which is that you're given time, you're listening, not giving up by the sound of it.
I also add them, if you don't mind. I think, Chair, Liz's team also take a direction from the resident themselves, the person themselves. And in the past, a lot of services go and meet with these people, and the services think they know what these people need. So Liz's team empower those people to take direction of their own journey, and I think it's quite successful on the basis as well.
Great to hear. Now, I'll withdraw those comments about watering down ambition, because it's great that there's that level of ambition, and you know, very grateful for the explanations as well.
Yeah, I suppose if you're not going to eradicate it, you can say, well, you're going to try to eradicate it, or we'll get 90% sorted. This is good. John, please.
It's a question, actually. People who are homeless or sleep on the streets or whatever else, how does that impact them in terms of being able to get a job or money, or being able to access services or whatever else? And once you bring them in, guess you probably answered it to some degree. How are you able to integrate them back into that over time?
So we're really lucky that we are now bringing what was an outreach service delivered by Partners Spring in-house. And as part of that, we're working to bring in specialisms around mental health, we've already got domestic violence support within the team, and we're looking to build mental health specialisms, as well as looking at gambling addiction, so that we can make sure we provide that support to people on the street and really understand what they're going through. Being on the street makes it much harder to access services, but that's what we want to be able to do, is we want to be able to make it possible to, if someone needs some support whilst they're living on the street, we'll give them that support on the street. It's not a barrier to getting that support, and part of that package will also be then to encourage them to consider pathways into accommodation, and we'll always give that help, but we still very much see them as a customer, somebody that we go out and see regularly, somebody that we sit with and talk to, buy them a cup of coffee, a sausage roll, make sure that we're going to see them on a regular basis. We have appointments with them. We don't just rock up. We respect their boundaries, and we make sure we can deliver those services to them whilst they're living on the street, and then hopefully as we move them into accommodation that's suitable to their needs.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I think that was enlightening for us all. Pleased to hear. Thank you very much. I'm going to page 19, which is the national context, the local context we've touched upon, and then page 20. I've got people questions here. Well, you've actually alluded to, which is the expand tendencies to sustainment support and focus on the mental health. And I know that there's reference later on to trauma thing there, which I think would come out of one of the workshops. That was interesting because of having to do with that. And then explore delivery of rough sleeper accommodation pods. I think Colin had a question on that. I think
Just more detail on what that is. It sounds as if it might be something very basic.
Japanese.
A bit more than that.
Capsule hotel.
I know that Councillor was keen that I spoke about this actually, because I think when we wrote that, and that was contained in a cabinet report where we actually agreed to invest money in the temporary accommodation, we actually had a perception, because we weren't working directly through our outreach service, that we would not be able to move the entrenched rough sleepers that we had on our street straight into accommodation. That's proven to be absolutely not the case. And everything that we've talked about previously, we believe that the right support, the right approach, the right care can move people into the right housing, and then we don't need that stepping stone. So we very much saw those homelessness pods as a stepping stone. I don't think that's necessary now, and I don't think Councillor Farrell thinks that's necessary. I don't think that colleagues around the table think that's necessary. What we would rather do with that money is invest that 150,000 that we've got left into more temporary accommodation, so people, instead of going to a halfway house almost, can go straight into a home that is much more akin to a kind of home that you and I would want to live in, and perhaps sets them up far better than kind of almost a halfway stop, which I think they could fall back from much more quickly. So I think we would look forward to bringing forward a recommendation to invest that money more into temporary accommodation, so we've got more ability to offer that.
So we'll be deleting that then, because that was basic.
We may deliver them in the future, but I think at the moment.
I suppose that was my point. That you've drawn out very cleverly, I think. Thank you. That my concern about putting somebody in an inferior type of accommodation gives them more chance to slip back. And I'd be very concerned about rough sleeper accommodation pods. It just doesn't sound right to me as something that would be appropriate. I think having people in a decent home that they can then live in properly and be helped to live in properly is a much better way forward. So I would hope that that could be removed.
I think there may always be space for something like that, and they have been very successful in other areas across the country. Simon, did you want?
No. So at the moment, we're not spending any money on that at all. As Lizzie has said, we're proposing to buy additional housing. I think from a strategy perspective, what we're saying here is that whatever the tool is that is required, we will employ.
Yeah.
So if at some point in the future we are struggling to get people off the streets and straight into general needs housing, and if that's what is required, then we will look at that as a solution at the right time, Councillor Ball. But totally take on board your point. But the cohort that we're working with at the moment, I think what Lizzie and the team have been able to show, we haven't needed that. we can't prejudge what the cohort in the future might look like and what their needs may be.
Yeah, no, I get that, and I suppose that something that is easier and cheaper to provide very quickly if needed, whereas proper accommodation, if I can use that phrase, is more difficult to achieve and deliver. But I think the general direction is a good one, and I think having that in the back pocket is possibly.
Would you leave the wording there as it is then? Explain the context. Sue wanted to come in.
Yeah, I was going to say, I was just about to disagree with Colin, which I do so with some timidity because Colin's the expert, but I would say that a pod locally is preferable to shipping someone off to the middle of Birmingham and bed and breakfast accommodation. So, you know, and it will ease costs internally, but also hopefully provide better outcomes. So, you know, any of these innovative solutions would be good. And can I just throw in as well, it'd be lovely to see something about housing cooperatives in the strategy. I've talked to Simon about this before, and cooperatives start really with availability of land. So, you know, if there are a group of people who are willing to sort of set up their own cooperative, it's got to start from ground upwards rather than you know, us impose. You can't impose a housing cooperative, but it's another innovative solution, I think.
And note that on there. Next page 21. I think Colin wanted to ask about delivering maximum.
Yeah, maximum affordable housing. Again, echoing Councillor Bragger's point from earlier, I think we need to have social housing in there as well. But you know, ensure we meet or exceed our local plan, which is echoing what George said earlier. I'm not sure we've ever met our local plan requirements for delivering of affordable housing, let alone social housing. Certainly not in the 7 years I've been on the council. I'm happy to be corrected on that, but I think I'm correct. So how are we going to do it now? You know, what will we be doing differently? I mean, you talked, I'm sure, a bit earlier in terms of how you're going to structure and police Section 106 agreements more rigorously, but I'd like a bit more information about how we're actually going to deliver it, because there's been no sign of it over the past 7 years.
Keep looking at me. Chair, so
7 years, I've used Simon.
thank you indeed. Councillor Ball is correct, and we haven't achieved 40%, I don't think, across any individual site, and certainly as an average, we're nowhere near that, are we? And I think you've quoted, is it 17% over the last couple of times in meetings I've heard as well? We need to up our game, which is why we put this statement in again, I suppose. But it does start with conversations and engagement with developers. How do we turn around their viewpoint or their automatic approach to us when they submit a planning application or start talking about one, that it won't be financially viable if we have to go at 40%. Other parts of the country achieve higher percentages than we do. So the challenge for us is not to be as accepting. And again, it goes back to my earlier comment as well. Our previous strategy has talked about doing more of the same and doing what we can. This is saying we will not accept it anymore. And, you know, I hope, and I've got no doubt whatsoever, that my officers who are involved in this area have all read this, all understand this, and all understand that we have now got to raise our game if you approve or if Cabinet approves this strategy.
All right, Councillor Young, and then I think Ray Lee wanted to.
Page 21, could you define a modern method of construction?
Yeah.
That'd be great. If they said affordable, does that mean equality changes or?
No, so it's so you can adopt modern methods of construction, for example, to help extend the property. So let's say you've got somebody who's in a property that's too small for them, but you can use innovative ways to actually adapt and extend that property, create new spaces that perhaps might not have been there before, and be a bit more innovative. You probably will have seen news articles about smaller homes and back gardens. For example, Bristol has a huge campaign to drive this forward, so that people that need accommodation that perhaps can't afford accommodation locally can still be housed locally, so still can live locally, if that makes sense. So it's about adopting different approaches to delivering accommodation that perhaps we haven't contemplated before in the past, and supporting those.
You said housing back garden, so if it's an existing building, would you be looking to build in someone in a back garden?
That's a possibility, yeah.
Housing, okay. I've got one more question, is when we talk about affordability, are we also talking about social tenants are able to buy their home in the future under a scheme, or does that not cover it?
So affordable housing covers a range of different options. I think our much preferred option is social rent. And the reason for that is that house remains in perpetuity an affordable home. That doesn't mean to say that, for example, shared ownership and other schemes wouldn't be accepted, but we would far prefer social rent to be at the top of that cascade, which Gemma talks about, because that means that it is there forever. That the maximum number of people can benefit from it, and when people are ready to move on to a property that perhaps they might invest in and own, that they can do that, and we're not stopping them do that, but that home then is then available to somebody else that needs it. But I think it's important to have a proper mix and balance, but I think our preferred option would be social rent, which I'm sure that Councillor Ball would very much
Next step. Young families or those, you know, save so much, but with inflation, they just can't get that deposit. So basically, you know, how can they buy an affordable home in the districts?
Yeah, so I think, like I said, I think it's about a matter of a proper mix, and it's about making sure that there's a proper mix as well in terms of size of units within new developments, so that there is that mix and balance for people to be able to afford local homes. But it's also about making sure that from a social rent perspective, there's as many homes available as possible for people that can't access or buy homes locally.
Okay, thank you. Bailey, did you want to come on?
My question's more on Appendix 1. If we're still discussing the strategy, I can wait until.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, perfect.
You're on the reserve.
Appendix 1 makes for a very sad and concerning read, really. From the data presented, we can see that white people, single people, and those aged between 30 and 44 appear to be the most at risk of homelessness. However, there's no information provided on the sexual gender of the applicants. Given that the aim that this strategy is, and I quote, to provide compassionate and targeted intervention to end rough sleeping, it seems like a bit of a significant omission to myself. Can you tell us whether the council holds the data on sexual gender of those at risk? And if so, does the data show what percentage of the applicants fall into which category?
So yes, we hold it. I don't know it off the top of my head, I'm afraid, but certainly we could incorporate that. So I think it's a very good comment, and certainly we can make sure that we reflect that in that evidence base.
Could I ask a supplementary, please, Chair? Sorry? Could I ask a supplementary, please, Chair?
Scrutiny, that's what we.
Thank you. If we hold that information, if we hold that data, why hasn't it been included in the appendix?
Not for any specific reason, just that Gemma and myself didn't put it in. So I think we need to put it in. So it's a really good.
Useless information may not say anything, but I mean, it's in there. Somebody may say, well, yeah, you're not hiding it, so that's.
No, absolutely not hiding it. No.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Anybody else on page 21?
Sorry, no.
Yeah, see. 22. Page 22. Russ, please.
Yeah, about the standards of private rented accommodation. I'm really pleased to see this, that we're now doing something. I was kind of, when I was first elected, it was one of the first things I was trying to push. But how does this fit in with what, going way back when Michael Gove was the minister, that there was like a whole proposal of portals and sort of the same sort of standards across all councils. Has anything, because I haven't heard anything about that. Are we doing this because that hasn't come forward, or is that still coming forward, or?
So that is still coming forward, but it's not here yet.
Right.
But that doesn't mean to say that we shouldn't have a better response to driving up standards in private rented accommodation.
Yeah.
That will help. But I still think that there will still always, even once that scheme's rolled out, there will still always be properties that we need to go out and that we need to drive up standards, that we need to challenge and hold those landlords to account. So we still very much see that piece of it is necessary. So yes, that will definitely help and add to our armoury, but it doesn't mean to say that there won't be issues that we still need to drive forward.
Yeah, that's done. So I'm pleased to see that as part of, Yeah,
I'm just going to agree violently with Lizzie again. I suppose what we're seeing across the country is that the percentage of housing that is private rented is growing. And actually, if we left that out of the strategy, it would be a massive omission, wouldn't it? Because, and we have concerns about the quality of that as well.
Yeah. Colin.
Yeah, I mean, I'm particularly pleased to see them introducing this licensing scheme as something I think I suggested at one point. But
And got funding for
yeah,
in the budget.
and we managed to squeeze it into the budget. But but going forward, that could be self-funding, and I've raised at full council the possibility of expanding that. And I wonder whether that could be included here as something that needs to be done in terms of boosting the staff time we've got to do the job, because there's 6,000 properties across the district. The national standard is to have one officer for every 600 properties, I think. We've currently got 2. So, you know, and it is self-funding if we introduce selective licensing areas, which we're able to do without now seeking government help, thanks to central government proposal back in November, December time last year. So I hope that could be expanded to include them.
Okay. Thank you, thanks. On page 23, if I may, which is a reference there to the percentage of rough sleeping cases responded to within 24 working hours, and then percentage of this is the key performance indicator, sorry, percentage of frontline staff trained in trauma informed support. So what's the figure at the moment? Do you know, or just
In which the
in the percentage of frontline staff trained in trauma informed support?
So it's none at the moment. So we adopt an informal trauma informed approach at the moment, but it's something that we're working on urgently.
Right, okay.
My team take on, and I'm glad I'm not one of my team because they're most amazing individuals, but the stories that they hear and experiences they go through, whether that's negative from a customer who's being really difficult with them because they're in themselves in a vulnerable position, or whether that's just sitting and listening to somebody who is really struggling, that they carry that with them and they leave at the end of the day, and you think you've got to go back to your life, your home, and deal with your family. What I would love to introduce, and I know Simon and Alex and everyone that's been looking at this would love to introduce, is almost an enforced process where those team have to open up and talk on a regular basis, so we can make sure we look after their well-being, but also that they then use those techniques and tools that they learn to better help our customers. So that's something that I'm really passionate about, and it's something that we're exploring at the moment. It isn't there at the moment, but it is something that we're absolutely determined to put in.
I can see that. I mean, there's some basic counselling skills that are required there, because they can be trauma. I'm not remember answering the phone from somebody who was abused as a child. This is working for an MP and minister at the time.
I think
I've never forgotten it. I had to blow a phone call on that, and of course speaking to somebody on the street, and the children that I have in my school have all these sorts of traumas, and it's
I think
so, it does need.
We're really, really fortunate, and I'm going to name check Anne here, but Anne is a Samaritan and she's an absolutely marvellous lady, and she really is driving up an understanding of this type of approach across the team. So whilst we aren't at the moment formally trained, I don't think we could have a better leader in that team to help make sure that we adopt that type of approach.
Okay, thanks. Thank you for that. On the next page 24, it's sorry.
I have one on 23.
All right, I can see. I'm sorry. Is it? Let me just check. No, you didn't write it down. You did. I did. Yeah. 24, by the way.
Yes. Thank you.
That's right.
On this list of KPIs here on eradicating rough sleeping, there are quite a few KPIs in there. But it seems strange to me there isn't one about how many people are rough sleeping. And I wondered if that's deliberate, whether you could talk me through the thinking on that.
No, it's not deliberate, and we can certainly incorporate that. And I think that's a very good point. So no, it's not. We report on that to government regularly. It's a statistic that we gather. We also do an annual rough sleep account. So it's something that we most definitely collect and report on. So there's no reason it shouldn't be in there. And it's an oversight. So forgive me, and we will have that in.
I thought it was a stupid question, but I asked it.
Stupid question.
Such a thing.
No such thing as a stupid.
I was testing.
You see, this phrase, there's no such thing as a stupid question, is not true, is it? Not with the president of the United States we have at the moment. It's gone out. All that's gone out. So forget that. But that was a good question. And you got an answer there. I'll give you first dibs on page 24, unless you've
Thank you very much.
anything else on 23.
Yeah, on 24, I had to look up
Yeah.
the acronym
That's aviation, actually.
HHSRS, which I now know is Housing Health and Safety Rating System, which probably should be defined in it, because I don't think that's a household name.
It's very snappy and I can never justify it. So, yep, you're absolutely right.
We're told we're working on Cat 1 hazards, or it's going to be measuring Category 1 hazards. And I just wondered what consideration given to Category 2 hazards, whether that's too much of a stretch. And this is all from my reading today. I knew nothing about this. I'll fess up now. But seem to include things that could still be quite damaging to people's health. So, just wondered if you could give that some consideration.
It's not my area of expertise, so this is definitely James Johnson's team's area of expertise. But as I understand it, we have different powers in relation to different categories of hazards. But I can certainly take that away and I can talk to James about that, and perhaps we could reflect Category 2 in there as well. But I will come back to you specifically on that.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. I just mentioned at the bottom they got percentage of disabled facility grants, budget spent. There's no. I mean, have you got any more information? You've got a comment on all the others, but not on that one. If you've got any, the big comment there or not.
Yeah. Chair, we said that we would be wanting 100% of that budget spent where possible.
I'll leave you to put that in if you wish. Then.
I'm going to brag a little bit now, Chair. So last year I believe it was 103%. And yeah, you're right. Our target is to spend that budget out every year.
Okay. Thank you. Well, good put in. That's me. And did you want to ask about the number of social rented homes delivered by the council?
No, well, I asked it.
That was before, right? Thank you. Page 25, 26. On the overview. On 27, Bromford. I know that Colin wanted to. And also, just mention now because it was raised by Russ, which is later on, so I'm not going to mention it after all.
Yeah, I mean, it talks about that being Bromford and then other housing associations. We know that Bromford provides something 80% of our social housing, social rented housing across the district. But what are we doing with the other housing associations to make sure they improve their standards, both of repair service and customer support? Because they also leave a lot to be desired from my personal experience, and other councils have the same problem in the wards of not performing. Is there any way councillors can be more involved in that process as well, perhaps?
Absolutely. So from my perspective, I think we need to get it right with Bromford, and I think we need to roll that model out in terms of how we're holding Bromford to account to the other housing providers as well. Gemma does meet with them regularly, but I think we need to add more weight to that, not taking away from anything that Gemma does, but make it, more people attending, more expectation, more requirement, so that it's not just Gemma's voice, it's a much more collaborative and collective voice, and I think members should play a part in that.
Thank you.
Okay.
So could we put something in about that, perhaps?
Yes. Page 28, 29. And on 30, this is where Russ wanted to mention a housing association that wasn't listed.
Yeah, there's a list here, but there's somebody I've been helping in my ward who lives in a Trident house. They're not listed, and I think that then leads to another point that they might only have 10 houses, as far as I understand, in the district. Is it not possible for these smaller ones for them to be managed into a different housing association? Because actually, when he contacts people from Trident, they don't even know they've got houses in Lichfield. So it doesn't seem a good fit either way, and yet it exists because of historical reasons, and therefore shouldn't it be something that we're trying to address?
So are you, sorry, forgive me for asking this question, but are you asking if, say, one of the bigger stock providers could absorb
Absolutely.
smaller ones stock.
Absolutely. Well, when you're talking about 10, I'm not sure exactly, but it's in that region. It's very difficult for Trident sending out their teams of people because there's nobody else about, and it's quite difficult for the tenants because you know, so.
So it's brokering those conversations is
Absolutely,
those
yeah.
are the big ones.
Yeah.
And say, you know what, we're kind of experiencing this in our area. Like, could you give it some thought as to
Yes.
absorbing their stock and
Yeah, so as kind of one of the stakeholders, the council, if they could facilitate those conversations, I think that would be helpful to the tenants. It might also be helpful to the housing associations.
I've just come over and I've got Miles.
Yeah, I mean, just as a point of information, I know that what was the Housing Corporation and predecessor of Homes England was actively encouraging housing associations at one point to take on stock from smaller pockets around the country to improve management services. So there's no reason why that can't be included in here, perhaps as something to do. You know, to encourage the bigger associations, once we've got them working properly, to take on the stock of the smaller isolated group.
I've got Councillor Miles.
Thank you.
In my head, I keep thinking the Castle of Trent. You see, it's straight me down Castle of Trent. Miles, please, yeah.
Just coming back briefly to working with Bromford, I just wondered, there was a meeting, I think in April, workshop with Bromford in April, but I just wondered, has the version of this strategy been shared with them yet? And that they have the ability to feed in their ideas to the strategy?
Yeah, so that was part of that. They've been asked to feed into it, and we will be asking them to recognise the strategy as well.
Okay, thank you.
And Sue and then John.
Actually, it's just occurred to me that rather than bigger housing associations being encouraged to absorb smaller ones, we want that sort of variety of registered social landlord, I think, in the area, in order to ensure there's some sort of buoyancy, if you like, in the way they operate. So it could be via management service level agreements, for example, rather than taking over the stock. But then if smaller ones could be encouraged to set up that sort of management agreement, that might be useful. It's also occurred to me following this list, I know Lizzie had said earlier on that the contract with Spring around rough sleeping has now been taken in-house. I believe that Spring had some dedicated accommodation. Whether that's the case, whether they're a direct housing provider or whether they're just managing properties on behalf of someone else.
So we leased the properties. They've now returned to us, so we now have those properties. Right. There's 6 housing pathway scheme units is what we call them, but they are individual properties that we have a number of previously rough sleepers living in, and as I said earlier, a couple of those are hoping to move on to more permanent, well, it is permanent accommodation, but more general needs accommodation, which will then free those properties up for more extra sleepers. So we'll be managing those properties moving forward with the support of LWMTS, who will be delivering the property management side of things.
Councillor Hill, John?
Certainly like the suggestion that Mr Woodward has made. Given the problems that I encounter on a daily basis with Bromfords and the problems that they have, I don't think that would be a good thing necessarily to incorporate a smaller one into Bromfords, to be honest. I very much go along the lines with, if you've got a good small one, I'd rather have that than incorporate it into a poor performing large one.
I think what we could do is broker those conversations. If we've got isolated properties in the district, which I think is what you're suggesting, and it's not even financially viable for that housing association to travel the 50 miles to sort out a broken plug, perhaps there are conversations that could be had. It's not something necessarily that we can enforce, but I think it's certainly worthy of an exploration with those providers to discuss the options and look at what could be achieved.
Russ, can I very quickly come back? I mean, I'm absolutely not against there being small and diverse. Trident is a massive housing association. It just happens there are only 10 anywhere near here, but that's kind of a different issue.
Yes.
And so we could pursue both, as it were.
Yeah.
It was the planning application recently which was rejected, and in the environmental aspect of it, it was about, well, the houses are really over the border and over the M6 toll and in Warsaw, well, in Liverpool district, but on the very close Warsaw border. And the idea was that Warsaw collect the refuse and recycling from those houses, even though we're in our property. And I don't know how that was going to work, but that was the case of these few houses stuck there, and it's clearly easier for another council to do that and working together. So surely, yeah, this could work for those isolated properties and the expense involved. So interesting. How they come to buy them in the first place is another interesting. Whaley Hope.
Thanks, Chair. On the lines of management services, is it something that the LWATS could pick up in terms of helping support those smaller ones like Trident?
Business opportunity.
I think it's something that we could explore.
Yeah, good answer. Well done. On page 31, there just got reference there to ourselves, overview and scrutiny, full council for that matter, and cabinet looking at the governance and accountability. That's our role.
Just before you move on,
Oh,
on that page, it says LT a number of times. They're all
Right,
the
yeah.
leadership team, which clearly is what LT stands for. And I just wonder why we don't just put, it makes the document slightly longer if we put leadership team every time, but it might make it more intelligible.
yeah. And then the evidence base there. So this is the issues of evidence, I suppose. If we have any queries, I've got some comment on one or two, but we've gone to the evidence base now, page 33, 34. Sorry. Yeah, you're always slightly out. Yeah, sorry.
So that just
If I keep talking, you see, I'll keep looking that way.
comparables between Lichfield and West Midlands, but it's West Midlands is quite diverse itself, it's quite much larger. Do we have like more smaller comparables? Like in the report there are, I mean, like, you know, kind of Chase about this. That was like, for example, in the page 34 at the bottom compared to West Midlands, it's quite hard. Because West Midlands, you've got Dudley, Wolverhampton, you've got Solihull as well, which is completely different to compare to Lichfield, which is really diverse and unique on its own. Maybe, I don't know, for example, like north of Birmingham, Sutton Coldfield, would that be better to compare?
I'm going to hand to Gemma, who mainly pulled the evidence base together. So in terms of the comparison, I don't know if that data is available, but Gemma.
Possibly it would, it would take quite a bit of work to do that, but yeah.
The chair, again, I'm not trying to teach anybody how to suck eggs, but a long time ago in local government, we used to do this all of the time, benchmarking, and we have benchmarking clubs for similar size organisations. A lot of that has got a little bit by the by, so it very much depends on who gathers what data and whether or not it's comparable to the data we gather. But we could have a look at that, yeah.
The reason is because like we see a lot of people from Birmingham moving to Lichfield. Is it reason because it's cheaper, or like is it because of space size? You know, so interesting to see comparing.
Cheaper.
I was going to say, I don't think you don't need much data for that, I think.
The written report.
Yeah, we'll have a look.
Thanks, thank you. Page 35. Well, page 36, I still wants to go in this one, but I'll get in first, but it's a different slightly, which is this democratic shift. This is on the second paragraph down. The democratic shift also affects the type of homes needed. This is catering for the older population, but that will be a curve that will go down as well. So you end up with lots of bungalows that everybody wants to go into future. This is how you deal with that, but with schools, you close schools down or close certain classrooms, and then you reopen them again when the population shifts. I know this from experience, but I just mentioned it as the bell curve there, if you like, with the population. But brings Sue in, probably that's an easier point to make than mine.
I mean, I think this is the nub of what the evidence is pointing to, that, you know, life isn't like it was 20 years ago or 30 or 40 years ago. You know, you kind of sort of nostalgic look back at what the past was, but it doesn't reflect the reality, which this strategy does. You know, it recognises that families are very different nowadays. It isn't the same sort of modular family, and it recognises that people are living to a much greater age and need additional support. So, you know, the evidence, I think, is really helpful, and it's great having that, because it just identifies the huge pressures on accommodation locally, you know, the idea of 488 days in temporary accommodation is just frightening. And, you know, and all of those other sort of details, the 591 households on the register and so on. It's interesting though, because when we talk about ground floor flats, bungalows and so on, developers don't want to provide bungalows because they cost too much in comparison to a 3-4 bed house. And interestingly, there was a developer was presenting its case for development in Burntwood yesterday, and so I asked about this particular question, and well, we might be able to provide 1 or 2. Well, that's no good. In 2015, we set up called then the Burntwood Town Deal, which included partners from Staffordshire County Council, Lichfield District Council, Burntwood Town Council, and we set out a housing priority, which was to try to assist people, older people living in accommodation that's outgrown their needs, to move into smaller accommodation, much more sustainable, much more manageable. But nothing changed from 2015 to 2020, when the town deal sort of disappeared. How can we make that start to happen so that developers are conscious of these changing needs, you know, separated families needing smaller accommodation, older people needing smaller accommodation, and then that releases larger accommodation for the general population? But are there any ways in which you can actually get developers to understand this?
That's where we have access to the same data that we have, and speculate and say, well, we'll try this and get more profit, fair enough, rather than say, well, this, we know what's going to happen, or at least what the data shows us, and we're going to fit in with that. But I just wondered if there's any influence we have there, or do they consult us anyway on these matters, or?
Generally don't consult us before the planning stage. So that's our opportunity at the planning stage. Outlay these, well, what we need.
Yeah.
Someone's got the answer.
Well, I'd like to think no, you've stitched me right up, Chair. No, but we write policy, but you know that is appropriate for the residents that live in our district as well. So we do have that lever that we can pull. Clearly, developers have commercial imperatives as well, and there's got to be the right balance. But as I say, we when we look at a planning application, we apply that to our local planning policy that we've determined, as well as some of the national, in terms of the SPDs and things like that as well. So I think it's worth having a look at and challenging us to do so.
I think as well, we are trying to build through the major planning team a far more open and consultative relationship with those developers. So we are encouraging more pre-apps, we are encouraging more discussion in advance. So I think, you know, it's in the developer's interest to build homes that people actually want and will sell. So it's about making sure that evidence and information is presented in a way that makes sense to them.
If I can just come back, it's interesting because on this particular development, there's a lot of local pressure to say, no, we oppose. And yet there's some nuance coming in. So a recently elected Reform County Councillor has said these houses should be for local people. Well, I don't know how you can define that, because what about somebody who's moving from Edinburgh to a job in Lichfield District? Is that a local person? But enforcing the sort of information about housing need, I think, would get people to see the bigger picture. So, you know, people might recognise then housing need rather than just saying not in my backyard. And I think it's important that this is publicised. A lot of the political messages are about, you know, do not build here, do not build there. You know, this is disgraceful that the government is saying we've got housing targets. Well, we don't have housing targets because the massive housing need in the country. You know, anything we can do to sort of emphasise housing need and some of this sort of evidence, which is great, Gemma. So thank you for all of that. I think sort of broaden the debate rather than not in my backyard.
Okay. Yeah, I think
I was going to ask. I've got 2 questions. One is about rentals, and seeing temporary accommodation, you know, as as you mentioned, you know, it's a really long stay. Can we work with private landlords? I think some of the other councils had about landlord scheme, but they might not get the market rate, but there's support from the council. So, so they'll support, you know, if there's troublesome tenants or anything like that, or, you know, housing needs to be repaired in a certain way. So that gets empty properties filled up, and private landlords, you're working, you know who they are, you're working with them to improve and helping tenants' lifestyle. And then my other question is about when on this page mentions about home ownership, which is out of reach for many. So a lot of develop, you know, we can see in the area there's more and more new development, and their pricing is always over the market price. It's very over, and then that affects the area to overprice as well. So is it possible to restrict the pricing, or council have a say on the pricing rather than developers? Because that means that, you know, everyone, it's hard for the rest to buy as well.
So I can take the first question. So I know that James's team are very keen to explore all sorts of different models with regards to private landlords who may, for example, want us to help with the way in which they lease and let their properties. So that will be looked into, as well as, for example, empty homes. There are opportunities to look to, for example, force a sale, or to even take those properties on and actually then let them on people's behalf. So that will be explored, absolutely. I can't answer your second part of your question.
Yeah, what happens when people can't answer questions is they tend to look at me. So
I was just gonna ask. I'm going
to try and manage expectations. Yeah. So again, just to add what Lizzie just said in terms of the developers and private sector and the role that they might be able to play, because I absolutely agree there is a role. And an example I would use is, you know, there are a number of shopping centres in our district around the country as well that have got the upper floors and vacant, continually vacant. So I know that there is now an ongoing conversation with the landlords or the owners of those properties about how you might let them out at under market rates to solve, or to help to solve part of the temporary accommodation problem. So I think we should be really aggressive about that and talking to people in developers and investors and commercial sector as well, and saying, what can you do to help out? Because social value is becoming more and more important in the commercial sector as well, being seen to be doing something positive for your local community. So I think there's a gap there that we can push through as well. And then I've just done a very rapid search while I was filling some time with that answer. Unfortunately, it says no, councils in the UK generally do not have the power to directly restrict house prices in their area.
Probably would have heard about it if they could. Bob in the corner. I'm going to page 38 and Colin.
Sorry?
Yes.
37. Just have a very quick question. In the table, it says Lichfield Town and Burntwood and rest of the district. Is that a different definition, or should that have said city?
Should say city, obviously.
Very good at that.
It has been downgraded. Would have affected the house prices, surely.
We should have town, and then the prices would come down.
Thanks, Ross. Colin, 38.
Yeah, I can't quite understand the table at the top of the page. I understand thinking behind it, what the housing affordable ratio, the average house prices, but the column at the end, approved scheme, I'm afraid defeats me. But what that means and why. Are we dividing one by the other? I tried that doesn't work.
Sorry, I've managed to lose. Writing notes. Which page are we?
It's
Top of page 38. Yeah.
Approved schemes.
So this was taken from our Hedner report, and I think it was around the availability and affordability.
Yeah, I understood that. It's that last column, Gemma, which doesn't, you know, it's a bit obscure.
So my understanding of it, and I may be wrong, is that that's the ratio comparison. The approved schemes where it says 4. The ratio.
I mean,
I'll have to look into that.
share with all the Or do you
Yeah,
have to?
but I suppose that you're following on from that question, and that you know, it's unclear.
And it's unclear for everybody.
Do we take it out, or
Yeah,
do we
yeah.
do we present the information in a different way so that it becomes clearer? I mean, what surprised me was that Lichfield wasn't as much out of kilter as I would have expected, because we know that Lichfield has significantly higher house prices, but the housing affordability ratio for Lichfield is lower than South Staffordshire and isn't much different from East Staffordshire, which kind of surprised me.
I think the thing I took from that was that because there's been a lot of house price increases nationally,
Yeah,
really across a lot of areas.
Presumably also wages, isn't it?
Yeah.
Wages are also probably
Yeah.
higher in
But-
Lichfield
but
than
if-
Burton.
but if you look at the crude numbers of the average house price, at 280,000, Lichfield is significantly higher than any of the others completely. So there's something going on there that
To get under, we'll get some more narrative into
isn't
it.
clear.
The source public health data, which not much fits with it. Yeah, get back to us and we'll share that.
But I suppose my point is that, you know, if we're trying to make a point by having that table in, the point needs to be clear, because at the moment it isn't.
Or you have to change the point, but you can get new data to let us know. Yeah. I can move on then to page 39. Page 40, 41. 2, 3. I'm going quickly through because nobody has indicated they wanted to speak on this. 4, 45, 6. There's a lot of interesting information here as well, but the questions on this. 48, 50,
48, sorry.
48, yeah, go on.
Yeah.
Please, thank you. Colin.
Dwellings by tenure. I mean, this is relating back to some of the things we were talking about earlier, really. 74% of the properties in Lichfield district are owner occupied. That's a good 8 to 10% higher than Tamworth, housing market area, West Midlands and England. And maybe that, as you've referred to, as part of the reason we got the problems. And it definitely demonstrates a need to provide more genuinely affordable rented housing so that we reduce that percentage of owner occupied properties and boost the amount of privately rented housing. Sorry, the social rented housing, which is only at 13%, which is significantly lower than all the other areas. And perhaps in the narration earlier, that table could be inserted as a demonstration of the desperate need to provide more. And it could, I mean, the fact that house prices are going up, mortgage rates are going up, more people may fall into homelessness because of that, because they can't afford the mortgage payments, which can give us a double whammy. So I think there's some more work to be done around that, perhaps, in terms of teasing out a bit more fully.
Okay. Yeah. 49, 50. 51.
Well, 51,
Please, yeah.
the completions, I think that demonstrates that we just haven't been cutting it over the past period of time.
52 then. And then 53, which I mentioned some time ago, the achievements so far
Yeah.
anyway. So.
I mean, I think that, you know, I think, Chair, you did mention it, but I think it needs to be commended very clearly that these are significant changes and improvements, and a demonstration that the ambition is actually a reality, that many great things are happening. The only thing at the bottom, the annual strategic and operational meetings with registered providers, that they may happen, but we know to date they haven't been that successful. So, you know, and I'm particularly thinking about the other minor providers as well as Bomford. But no, well done. I think that this is fantastic work, and I think commendation needs to go back not just to Gemma and Lizzie for the work on the strategy, but also to Anne and the rest of the team, the work on the ground that they do, which is very stressful and difficult. And they really have come on. Certainly, the housing service provision from this council in the 7 years that I've been on the council has improved immeasurably, and I think they need to be commended for that.
Completely agree.
Well, if the minutes are correct, this will be mentioned twice at the beginning when I mentioned it at the end. Colin has added to it, so yes, it'll be on the record there. So I appreciate that.
And finally, I think on the 1-page summary.
Going. Finish that. The 1-page summary on page 55, which I thought was very good. Colin, do you have a question?
I just was going to say that is very good. So well done.
Thank you very much.
A colour version now. I didn't get one at the time. Great, thank you. Thanks. Well, you held up very well against all the questions, and was it a very good in-depth document? It's got.
Sorry, Chair. I've just thought of something else.
Right.
Because we did mention it earlier. I think it was Russ mentioned it earlier. It was Anne. I think I remember. I mean, that is a very good summary of what we're aiming to do, but it doesn't say why we're aiming to do it. And if we, it's really good to get it on 1 page. I don't know how you do it, but clearly there's a desperate housing need in literally and across the country. It was Sue mentioned this as well, and we need to kind of emphasise that's why we're doing this. We're not doing it because it's a nice thing to do, or we're woke or any of that kind of rubbish. We're doing it because it's really important and will affect people's lives for the better if we do it properly.
Me and Gemma
100% agree.
genius at fitting extra words into the document. I'm sure that gets fed in.
Just reduce the font size.
I just say no one left behind, which is an American phrase used by George Bush, I think, originally, and context. So, but anyway, yes, if you prove it to make Council Board happy, that would be, yeah.
Possible to make me.
We don't want it 2 pages. It's got to be 1 page.
I did want to say one other thing. If
Please.
I've got Grace sitting behind me, who's one of our national graduate scheme
Oh, yeah.
team members, and she has.
Can I apologise straight away? There was no financial questions for you.
She has been absolutely instrumental in pulling this together. It's been a really
That's
fantastic.
why there's no question, because
And I just wanted to recognise Grace's efforts in bringing this together, because she's really been an absolute superstar.
you've got mentioned on YouTube now. Maybe not for the first time, I don't know.
Thank you, Chair.
Well, thank you. Yes, thanks all. Well, really appreciate it, and thanks for everybody with the questions and the comments, mostly questions, which is what we're about. So thank you for that. Thanks for the
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for all the feedback. It's really useful. Thank you.
Great work.
The next item, agenda item 6, is about the planning trials, an update on that. And again, the recommendations for Overview and Scrutiny Committee to note, and of course, more importantly, provide comments where necessary. I would suggest brackets where helpful as well, but where challenging, actually, it's even better, I suppose. Yeah, there's the abbreviations in here, the odd acronym maybe, but abbreviations here, which is really spent some time trying to work it out, which is the EOT one, which has no reference anywhere. And this is why these reports ought to be in time for the meetings I have for pre-agenda and not 3 hours after the time of that pre-agenda meeting. So I can draw attention to those. I'm going to raise them at this meeting here. So the abbreviations are not explained there. The EOT, JR, we assume is not a reference to any soap opera from the 70s, but actually to judicial review and things like that. We'll come to those as we go along. So to introduce it.
Yeah, just
rather difficult start for you there, but
Don't know how to follow that.
Simon.
Yeah, I think that Kerry will be talking about extensions of time, but I'm not going to try and steal her thunder. Just before she starts, though, Chair, Artemis Ansell wrote this paper for us.
Yes.
With Kerry. She did intend to be here today. I don't know if one of you already fed back, but she had an.
Oh, he lowered the screen. The organs was ready, but
She's had quite a large operation this week, so she was going to try and dial in, and I said it's not in your interest, or frankly our interest, for you to do that from your hospital bed, Artemis. So that's the only reason tonight.
That's all right. I mean,
Over to you, Kerry.
so yes, if you want to, what I'd like you to do is just give us some idea. We'll go through the report our page, I'm afraid, but if you want to give us some outline to start with and that, and get your rebuttals in early or something.
Yeah, hi members. My name's Kerry Challoner and I'm the Development Management Manager, in case I haven't met any of you before. So yeah, Artemis is my line manager. So the report is essentially an update, the trial about the planning trials that we started in February, which are essentially to improve our planning service. I think there was back in October 23, there was agreement that we needed to improve our service and make it much more efficient and so on. Section 3.1 says what the trials were intended to do. They were for a period of 3 months, starting on the 1st of February. And with the goals to speed up decision making, reduce the time taken to process householder and minor decisions, and eradicate EOTs, which are extensions of time.
Well, I worked it out. Went on the internet. It's cat. But anyway.
So yeah, to eradicate extensions of time, which are essentially agreements that we are allowed to do under legislation with developers to take as long as necessary to make a decision, to actually come to a decision. Government says we have to make a decision on these applications within 8 weeks, unless we agree an extension of time with the developer. So previously we were using a lot of extensions of time and things were taking quite a long time. And also to reduce our backlog. So if you've got lots of extensions of time, you've got lots of applications sitting on the shelf, just merrily waiting for something to happen, essentially. So section 3.1, yeah, that says what we were trying to achieve in the trials. Section 3.2 says how we approach that. So we set up a planning focus day, which was for officers to essentially turn off the communications, but put an out of office on and actually work on the written work that they have to do, because there's quite a lot of written work involved in planning. They were responding to messages within 48 hours, etc. I think previously at Lichfield, they used to do that on an afternoon, probably pre-COVID. I think they used to say developers, customers, you can get hold of officers on a morning, on an afternoon. You've got no chance, the phones are off and they're working away on their report. So we transformed that into a Tuesday.
Well, let me go through the report, see what you're doing now. So let me go through the report for you, then you can add in as
okay.
It was just oh yes, the extensions, use of extensions of time, that extensions of eventually got that in the end. Yes, and I certainly remember the emails that out of office on the Tuesdays. That seemed to work very well.
Yeah.
I understand it. The question I've got about there being no amendments. I mean, it sounds good because you're moving things on, but what I don't understand is what sort of amendments would come forward, and if they're not coming forward, what happens? I just don't understand. You're saying no amendments. It just sounds a bit odd, really, because actually work in reality in practice.
So essentially the way
an example, that would be great, because I'm just completely ignorant of it.
No, that's fine. So you could, for example, I always take it back to a householder application. You could submit a householder application for a single story rear extension, and that might breach our planning policies designed to protect light. And so we would go we would go back to the agent and say, this breaches our policies. You need to reduce the size of that extension and amend the planning application that you've submitted. So from last April, we stopped taking amendments on householder applications and said, you need to think about this more. The agents and the architects, you need to think about our policies more, and pushing that away from us spoon feeding the developer. So you go backwards and forwards, and sometimes you could end up with sort of 3-4 sets of amendments. We would then, as an authority, have to write to everybody again. And Again, this-
Was this sort of essentially laziness on the part of the, it may be? Oh, yeah.
Not on-
Oh, yeah, I'll do that.
say on the
Instead
part
of
of
saying, look, these are our policies, you can see them, they're not
Yeah.
they're transparent. Fit it in there. Oh, it's worked, so.
So it has worked. We ruled it out for householder applications last April. Yeah, last April. And then as part of the trials, we ruled it out on minor applications as well. So that started in February. So that skewed some of our statistics.
The other one above that, on top of that page 58 there, about the planning, which is looked a bit controversial, the planning, publicising planning application. There's one in my ward, and the house is there on this road, but the application was about an outbuilding right on the other side of the road. So I nearly wasted your time and emailed you and said, is there a yellow? Oh no, I better go and have a look. So I went and had a look, and there, lo and behold, there was the notice on very bright yellow, so they can't be missed on a lamppost there, closest to where that application was. So that seems to have worked. I've not had any complaints yet, ward councillors, but yeah, so that's.
Yeah, I think we're not the only authority that have gone down this route.
No, I see that. Yeah.
Did change. We did make an effort to change our site notices to be this yellow super paper that, you know, other teams are actually stealing off us now. You see parking, it's indestructible effectively. So,
Yes.
so the team have been briefed on putting more than one site notices up in some cases where a rear extension might be affecting houses at the rear and so on.
Mm.
And to be honest, the ones that have been brought to my attention because there was a site notice essentially there. So
You recycle the strings, unlike the Royal Mail and their rubber bands. The thing with you know, people have said we never had the letter that you have sent in the past, and with Royal Mail, things aren't quite as they used to be. So
yeah, I mean, I have to say,
how this works.
in terms of my career, you used to send out letters and they would get there the next day, sort of 20 years, and that doesn't happen these days. So
Okay. So feedback and results, household applications there. Any questions? Anne, please.
I think you might have answered it, although not fully, about has there been a reduction in the number of, I don't know, responses or comments, given that now where you're not sending the letters?
we haven't done the statistics on that. However, I don't think that's been felt across the team. We are still getting a high number of people getting involved in the planning process, so to speak. And it's not just people that object. We have to remember that some people support applications.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we haven't seen a downturn.
Okay. There's a reference down 3.5 to the JR, to the judicial review challenge. Are you able to say anything about that? I mean, that's quite a step to have a challenge like that.
Yes, I am actually.
If something's been sent to us as members and I'm not ready, that's fair enough. But
That is that's all in the public domain, so that's fine. That was an application that came to planning committee, and if you're a third party in this country, you don't have a right to appeal a planning decision, and the only way you can challenge a decision is through the courts. So a JR, judicial review challenge, is a neighbour wanted to judicially review one of our, and I say it's a challenge because the first step of that is they write to us and say, we are going to challenge you on X, Y, and Z. And our legal representative went back and said, well, actually, I don't agree with that. And then the 6-week challenge period is gone. So but it is, they don't come along very often. They can be
I've never heard of one.
the councils. Because you could end up essentially revoking a decision, I suppose, if your decision isn't robust in the first place.
okay, thank you. Thanks for that. Page 59, any questions on there? Again, with the graph, which I've got it doesn't matter if this is black and white, but in green in there, but you've got different shades of green and different shades of yellow. I didn't personally understand the graph myself, but then again, I'll perhaps get some help after the meeting. Again, check it out. We'll leave that. I'll just get someone else to help me with that one rather than waste time here. 314. That was interesting.
Can I ask-
All applications being processed.
Get to the chair.
I mean, it's counting your chickens a bit, isn't it, on being first for 2 months? And I think it's quite interesting, the statistics, because you say 311, so you were broadly, we were, not you, we, broadly in line with the average England performance, but it was actually 10% worse than the average, which is not broadly, you know, in some of our housing statistics, that 10% was quite a big thing. So it's great. I mean, it's obviously been a really good thing. It has improved. But I think you want to wait for more than 2 months to be claiming too much.
Yeah, I think that's an entirely fair point. I guess I mean, I didn't write it, but I think the reason it's bold as well is just trying to emphasise the difference that the trial has had over those 2 months.
This trial has
Obviously,
clearly.
if we don't sustain it, it'll mean nothing at all, and certainly won't mean anything to our residents. So
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else on page 60? No? 61, the next steps.
Chair.
Sorry, yeah, let's see.
Page 60, I just want to refer to paragraph 3.17, because there was a lot of concern across membership of the council about these changes from letters to site notices, but 2 responses were received from residents raising concerns. So, you know, what councillors' fears weren't reflected by the response from the public. So I thought that was an interesting paragraph there to highlight. And I hope that the 2 councillors referred to, the feedback has been given directly to them as well. It should be.
You got the next steps there, you're extending the trial on there. So if you have a briefing note or something before it gets to because our next scrutiny meeting, well, the scrutiny meeting after this will be the 18th of September. So if there's a briefing note, say how things are going. I know it's going to the cabinet, but that would be helpful. But it'll be onus on me to do an email to someone asking for that, if that's all right. 321 there about the newsletter.
Could I say
Sorry,
something about 320?
Yeah.
And it's just because it's a sort of thing about lots of our lives, isn't it? Is how you maintain the routine while dealing with the very specific tasks. I just wondered if there was anything else to say about, you know, what's a difficult thing for all sorts of administrative enterprises. You know, how the routine can get ignored, or you're still doing the routine and not dealing with the crucial things about deadlines in particular.
Yeah, I think in terms of the trials, it has flagged up to us that getting it right, not just with the officers processing the applications, actually getting it right when the applications hit the deck is super important, and making sure that, and that's why that resource is going in there for a temporary period of 6 months, hopefully longer. I'll get my way, I don't know. But that certainly is really important, making sure that, because our validation, our technical support team are the start and the end of the process, which is just as important as the middle part of the process. So,
Chair,
Yes, sorry.
I mean, the overall thrust of this is that it's been a big improvement and needs to be commended. And I just wonder, in terms of what you've just been talking about, that the kind of a minor administrative things, if that's what I'm understanding, whether some computerized system and some kind of artificial intelligence approach might be something to deal with that. Perhaps it will require some investment, but it might make it, if it's a fairly routine thing, scanning a document and checking that various things have been attached to it, that can be done by a machine just as well as by.
that's certainly something that we are looking into at the moment. I think we've got, on the bottom level, we've got the bots which do one thing and put it in another place, but AI, I think, is definitely something that's going to be have a big space in planning.
Yeah. If I could add as well, just to reassure, that's exactly correct as well. We're shortlisted for a digital award at the end of this month, I think. So we are somewhat making a name for ourselves in the market. As a consequence of that, we are continually being approached by organisations who want to launch AI into different parts of local government. Planning is one area that I think is a real opportunity.
Chair, sorry, I'm going to have to go now.
Thank you. Well, to come, I got your apologies. Yeah. Good to see you. Thank you. Go over the next page 62. Then it actually, what the executive was saying, 3.25 about the service that we give to others. I mentioned what the service was exactly. Are you able to help me with that? 3.25.
Yeah, Chair.
I just couldn't visualise what it was that we did, as it were.
So essentially doing what we do, but for other authorities who have resource and resourcing issues effectively. So I think there's a couple of councils, one quite close to home, one Derbyshire and Nottinghamshire. So these councils are like a similar situation to us, except not as good, and need support, have too many applications, can't recruit or what have you. We are LWM, sorry, are commercialising that.
We actually look at their applications sometimes. We're asked to look at their applications and decide. Yeah.
Yeah. So LWM
tell the councillors over this
effectively.
place, by the way, are we?
Yeah. So the officers in LWM effectively do that for us with the major applications, which is another type of the big sort of strategic stuff. But essentially, it always comes back to the council for decision.
Could I ask there whether there's any tensions between what you obviously have to do and do very well of working on major applications to make them as good as possible, presumably, and then when they come to the planning committee, I'm not going to say conflict of interest at all, but there must be a bit of a tension there between.
So they do take amendments on the major applications at the moment. I'm sure they'll continue to do that. And that's effectively making sure that these huge schemes are the best that they can be in our district, and that's a priority.
But then if they turn down at planning committee, for example, that's just.
Yeah, but sorry, Chair. So PPAs is what we're talking about.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, and that's the opportunity to the conversation we had earlier about housing, where we can really push developers on what our local policy is and help them to into it. But we make it very, very clear. You cannot buy the outcome of a planning application. The planning committee will decide at the end of it.
Okay. I think on the rest of the report there, any questions that is? The issue I have about with planning generally is that you ask somebody to go to a planning committee, and I did once and it didn't happen, but it's not to go there. It was a mistake. These happen. But if you go to planning committee and it's refused, you've got all the reasons why it's been refused. If it's an officer's decision, you don't have that. It's quite brief, you see. So a full report of the planning committee, objections here, reasons here, you don't get that as a councillor in the officers' reports. Is there a way of accessing more information? In the old days, I used to come in and go through the planning reports because you've got little notations there, which are always very useful as for a councillor about what's said about what and what they're waiting for. But is there a way of getting more information on the reason why officers refused or approved an application?
The main difference between a committee report and a delegated report is that we don't put all of the policies, we don't explain the policies fully in a delegated report, whereas in committee report they're all set out for you in full. And they will still have the reasons for refusal are still the most important thing on either decision, because that is the first thing that a planning inspector will be looking at. And yeah, what comes into the report is kind of.
There's also the consultations, which aren't then included. And if you go onto the website, the consultations with objections, sorry, not consultation, objections from members of the public aren't on there.
They are, and
they get whipped off quickly.
Oh, sorry. Yes, we do take them down from the website, and that's because our what we published, I think it's a statement of community involvement or what have you, says that we will take that down once we've made the decision.
It'd still be there if it's a committee, and then those objections would be on that report, so.
Yeah, they do still get summarised. A delegated report will still have the full planning history. It will still have a summary of the objections that we've received. We just don't name and shame neighbours, essentially. We don't name and shame them.
You can't rewind, you know. Right now.
Can I just ask something again about the LWM planning section, where there's this income generation, which is excellent, 377 plus £1,000. And the team has been expanding from 1 to 6. So I wondered what the profit was, basically. Sort of take it.
Yeah, so Artemis has put the gross not net number in there. So obviously, as we become more successful, we have to grow the team in order to deliver the work. Yeah, I think, just trying to think offhand, LWM's financial accounts are about to be finalised as well. Planning income. I'm not trying to avoid the question. I promise. Planning income significantly impacted in a positive way on our overall output at the end of the year. I think our contribution to the council over the last 2 financial years back, either through dividend or through fees, is about £750,000. By the end of this current financial year, that will go over £1 million. So that's the benefit to the council. What I can do though is to identify what part of that is planning related. I'll do that.
Thank you very much.
Just one more general question, which is that when you have a target, if it's a target of a number, then you go for that number, and so or a time frame or so on. But then other things might get ignored, pushed aside, or whatever to get to that particular target. So can I be reassured, as chair of the Scrutiny Committee, that the target of speeding up the process, which has been an amazing success, I think. That's not at the cost of quality mistakes in that way. I mean, there's been one recently where we've lost an appeal, but I think nearly all the appeals they're dismissed by the inspector, which is obviously good for us. But sometimes out of your hands, and councillors are pushing too far, in my view, on a particular application. And anyway, but is there the quality control on that is still there? Is it?
It's still there. If anything, it's more harsh, because sometimes previously when we were amending applications, you were kind of eking towards something that was good, but you're kind of moving something closer towards to the line, but you're not quite getting over the line, and then you end up approving something that isn't as great. Is it bad enough to refuse, kind of thing, rather than is it good enough to approve? So yeah, appeal decisions. In terms of appeals, we have a similar number of appeals at this point this year that we had to this time last year. Feels like we've got a lot at the moment. I think it's like appeal season. I think it does generate a lot this time of year. I don't know why, but yeah, in terms of making robust decisions, that's really important, and used to do that.
Well, I would ask the question. So
Yeah, it's good.
hopefully, thank you. I think that's it then. We've had comments on there. We haven't got any brilliant ideas for you, but
Sorry, one more.
sorry.
It's just a really small comment actually. Page 64, there's a relevant web link. So I clicked on it and it does say page not found, but I found it myself. But maybe if anyone else wants to click on that link, it's a pre-planning guidance link. I clicked on it, it says, but
Oh yes.
click on it. I don't know if anyone else clicked on it, but I've clicked on it.
No, the last few pages of the report give the background to the legal side of it and the rest of it. So that's all good. Appreciate your time on that, and the success is undoubted there. So I hope Artemis is getting better soon. Not that we don't mind having you here, Kerry, because you've had quite a few emails of mine in the past, and I appreciate that. So that's it, isn't it? Yeah. As far as that's said, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. The last item for ourselves is the work programme. Do it.
I can do, yeah. So this work programme is looking at the coming municipal year, so that's 2025 to 2026. It has been through leadership team who have contributed a couple of additional items onto the end of it. It's effectively taking the items that were on the previous work programme, have rolled forward into this year. I previously discussed it with the chair and the vice chair at the pre-meeting last week. But this, again, it's over to you as a committee to review this and see how you want to allocate your time to provide scrutiny over the coming year.
So there's the task group on transport that we're definitely going to progress. We've had a response from Councillor Ray with some detail on it. So we're trying to narrow the focus down because it didn't include planes, but it did include trains and things. Original idea, so it was a bit too much really. But I'm not sure how far we're going to get with buses and the county council either. But you know, we'll see where we go from there. Colin.
Chair, with reference to what we talked about earlier, empty home strategy, it doesn't appear in the programme currently. It's been merged with the housing homeless, as we had earlier. That will be coming separate to us as a separate paper at some point, but it's not on the schedule. I think it perhaps needs to be added in. Is
that right? Is that the understanding?
I would look to Lizzie here, to be honest, just because I think previously, the plan was that empty homes strategy was merged into the housing and homelessness strategy. Sorry.
So I think what we'll be doing is putting together a policy document that outlines the powers that we have and the activities that we can deliver to try and tackle empty homes. The housing and homelessness strategy sets our ambition to do that. It's whether or not you wish to look at that policy document, which really will just outline those powers and how we can adopt them in a cascade that we would use. So I guess that's up to the committee as to whether that's something you feel that you scrutinise.
Well, I mean, when James and yourself came along originally, we had a very full debate on it. Some of us made some suggestions, and I guess it's about closing that loop and checking how much of those suggestions have been included. I totally understand that it's a point of detail. Maybe it comes as a briefing paper rather than a report, but it's just about closing the circle, really.
Really, what I'll leave it to you to tell us what you want to say.
I'll leave it for discussions and we'll find the best way forward, one that satisfies your interest in it and that you want to, whether it's a briefing paper or a draft, then we'll see it from there. So you make sure that's done. I don't know whether, see, you were going to mention my email about, I asked members what their priorities were or what their main interests were. I did have a list of that, which I printed out and haven't brought with me, but I did email all members with that.
I can mention that, Chair.
I'm going to mention it. I just wondered if.
And certainly, local government reorganisation was requested by a number of members. I just wonder whether the 18th of September is getting a bit too close to the November date, and whether we could have a sort of interim verbal report possibly at the July meeting, because things are starting to move and possibly crystallise. I don't know, but I think because of members' interest in this, perhaps some sort of either briefing paper or verbal update would be good before September, which is getting very close to November.
That sounds reasonable, doesn't it, Executive?
Yeah, Chair. So we've commissioned, this is public knowledge, I think, as well, but we've commissioned KPMG to help us with the development of our final proposal. They're looking at two key options. That piece of work should be completed. It's about, I believe, about an 8-week process for them to do that. However, as Councillor Woodward has suggested, we will have hints and we'll have a number of different issues that will come up from that. So I'm more than happy to bring.
It's something that's useful for scrutiny to give some feedback on and that detail. I'm sure there'll be a big report at the end. But maybe we'll have a task group on that, but that's how we get on. Yeah. Thank you. I'm trying to read them out because I've just nearly locked up his laptop. It's not touch screen, is it?
No.
Yeah, see that. So I won't do that, but I've circulated to all the members our particular priority. But certainly local government reorganisation was accepted as the main one there. And with that, I thank everybody for the questions and the time. And welcome back, Steve.
Thank you, Chair.
There's me. Very lovely. Favourite.